Kitchen Stewardship people. What's better, baking with weight or baking with measuring cups? We're going to talk a little bit about that today. I've been challenging myself through this grinding grain challenge with the mock mill to bake using weights. At first I thought it was amazing. Then I started running into some trouble. So today we're going to talk about the pros and cons of baking by weight instead of by volume measurement. There are three main reasons that you might want to bake by weight: consistency, individuality, and that you only have to measure once if you're grinding freshly ground grains. So by consistency, I mean that when you're measuring flour, you're scooping flour and measuring, there can be a lot of variation. The coarseness of the flour, the moisture, humidity in your air, if you kind of pack it a little more even though you're not supposed to, or if your flour is more fluffed up than someone else's, if it's settled in the package differently, those can all actually impact the amount of flour that actually goes into your recipe, as can things like your elevation and your climate in general. And that can even be climate in the same place if you're baking in the winter versus baking in the summer, because flour behaves differently with the moisture of the air and the temperature and all that stuff. So if you're using a recipe that calls for grams of grain, you're going to be much more consistently even with what the baker, the writer of the recipe, intended. That's a plus. Also, it gives you the chance to be in control. That's what I mean when I say individuality. So for those of you who are perfectionists and you want your recipes to turn out the same every single time, you can make that happen by baking by weight, and then things like a change in temperature or humidity will not impact your bread products. Lastly, if you're grinding fresh ground grain, you only have to measure once, okay? You can measure like the actual whole grains, throw them through the grain mill, and they come out directly into your recipe. You don't even need to touch a measuring cup ever, which is kind of cool. So if you can find other people's recipes that already use measurements by weight, such as grams is the most common, or perhaps ounces, you're golden. That's actually a much easier way to make baked goods. However, if you're trying to take your own favorite recipes, or you have recipes where the measurements are called for in cups, it does begin to get a little bit complicated. So you might not want to switch to using a scale and bake by weight if, for example, you're a novice baker and maybe you have no idea what the dough should look like, because if you're trying to translate measurement by cups into weight, there's a little bit of hit and miss the first few times, and you kind of have to figure out if the dough looks right to make sure you chose the correct number of grams. The internet varies widely, so if you just say something like, "Okay Google, how much does 1 cup whole wheat flour weigh?"
4 1/4 ounces. On the website KidGartnerFlour.com, they say, a cup of all-purpose flour weighs 4 1/4 ounces or 120 grams.
Well, you might think 120 grams is perfect, but if you phrase it like this: "Okay Google, how many grams are in 1 cup whole wheat flour?"
Here's some information from the web that might possibly help. 129.60.
That's not going to make any Google Home commercials, okay? So already I've asked the same question in 2 different ways, and I've got 120 grams or 129 grams. On a cup of whole wheat flour, you can pretty much find everything from 113 to 157. So it's a huge, 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 huge problem. It actually is going to take some thinking and some guess and check and some experimenting. If you have no brain power whatsoever and you just want to follow a recipe and your recipe doesn't go by weight, then you are probably not a good candidate to make a recipe by weight. In the next video, we will talk about how to transfer your own favorite recipes that measure in cups, measure by volume, to measuring by grams or weight, in case you have a little brain power left and you want to play along. I'm Katie Kimball from KitchenStewardship.com.